Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated.
We're diving into some pretty fascinating stuff today, research that I think is really going to resonate with a lot of you.
Yeah, it's something we all think about, right?
Definitely. I mean, who doesn't want to live a long and healthy life?
Right.
And who doesn't love food?
Especially food.
So this research we're looking at today really gets into the nitty-gritty of how what we eat over the long term affects how well we age.
Exactly. And the studies that you sent over, the nurses' health study and the health professionals' follow-up study, these are like the gold standard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These are huge long-term studies. I mean, we're talking data collected over decades, starting back in 1986 and going all the way to 2016.
Which is incredible because you can actually see over time how people's eating habits played out in terms of their health. Like not just what they ate for a week or a month, but over years and years and years. Yeah, and that's what makes these studies so unique and so valuable. We're not talking about fads or quick fixes here. This is about long-term patterns and how those patterns affect our chances of aging well.
Right. And when we say aging well, we're not just talking about like not getting sick. This research takes a much broader view.
Yeah, it's a much more holistic view of what it means to be healthy as we get older.
Absolutely. And, I think this is what a lot of people are really looking for, right? They want to know, how do I stay sharp mentally? How do I keep my body strong? How do I stay positive and engage in life?
Yeah.
And how do I avoid those major chronic diseases that can really weigh you down?
It's about living a good life, a fulfilling life, even as we get older.
Exactly. And one of the things that really struck me when I was looking at this data is that it's actually achievable. Like almost 10% of the people in these studies, and remember, we're talking over 105,000 people, actually achieved this state of healthy aging, even after being followed for up to 30 years.
That's a pretty encouraging statistic, right? It means that it's possible to age well, and this research helps us understand what we can do to increase our chances.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes this deep dive so exciting.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. How did the researchers actually measure what people were eating, and how did they define this idea of healthy aging?
So they looked at, what people were eating over these decades. Specifically, they looked at how closely people adhered to 8 different dietary patterns. Some of these will probably sound familiar, things like the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, plant-based diets, things like that.
Yeah, those are all pretty well known.
Right, and then they also looked at the consumption of ultraprocessed foods, which is something that's gotten a lot of attention recently. And I think that was a really key part of the study. They really wanted to understand how those convenience foods that, let's be honest, a lot of us rely on, how those affect our long-term health.
I think that's so important because, those foods are everywhere. It's hard to avoid them completely.
Exactly. So to get back to your question about how they measured all this, they used food frequency questionnaires, which is a pretty standard tool in nutrition research. Basically, people report how often they eat certain foods over a period of time. And they did this repeatedly over the course of the study, so they could really get a sense of people's long-term eating habits.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about healthy aging? How did they define that?
So they used 4 key indicators. First, they looked at cognitive function, which is basically how well people are thinking, their memory, their ability to process information. And they assessed this through questionnaires asking people about any decline they've noticed. Then they looked at physical function, so things like being able to walk, climb stairs, do everyday activities without difficulty. And again, this was assessed through questionnaires asking about any physical limitations people were experiencing. Third, they looked at mental health, specifically using a standard scale to measure symptoms of depression. And finally, and this is really crucial, they looked at the absence of 11 major chronic diseases by the age of 70.
11. Wow, that's a lot.
It is, and it really covers the big ones like heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, lung disease, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. It's a pretty comprehensive list.
So it really raises the bar for what it means to age healthily. It's not just about, being able to walk up a flight of stairs. It's about avoiding those serious health problems that can really affect your quality of life.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes this study so powerful, because it's not just looking at one aspect of health, it's looking at the whole picture.
Okay, so we've got a good sense of how they measured people's diets and how they defined healthy aging. Now, let's get to the heart of it. What did they actually find? What's the connection between these different eating patterns and the likelihood of aging well?
Well, the good news is that across the board, higher adherence to all 8 of the dietary patterns they looked at was associated with a greater likelihood of healthy aging.
So it's not like there's one magic diet that you have to follow?
Right. It seems like embracing a generally healthy approach to eating in any of these various forms can have a positive impact on how well you age.
That's encouraging. It means there's some flexibility, right? People can find a way of eating that works for them and still benefit.
Exactly. Now, that being said, some of the dietary patterns did show a stronger association with healthy aging than others.
Okay, so let's get into that. Which ones stood out?
Well, the researchers used something called odds ratios to compare the likelihood of healthy aging between the groups with the highest adherence to a particular diet and those with the lowest adherence.
So a higher odds ratio basically means a stronger link between that diet and healthy aging.
Exactly. And they found that these odds ratios range from 1.45 for the healthful plant-based diet all the way up to 1.86 for the alternative healthy eating index, or AHEI.
Okay, so the AHEI seems like it might be the winner here. What is that exactly? What kind of foods does it emphasize?
The AHEI focuses on a high intake of fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and whole grains, as well as healthy fats. It also recommends limiting things like red and processed meats, sugary drinks, foods high in sodium, and trans fats. So it's a pretty well-rounded approach that prioritizes whole, minimally processed foods.
It sounds like a pretty balanced way of eating. Lots of good stuff and not too much of the bad stuff.
Right. It's not about deprivation. It's about making healthy choices most of the time. And what's really interesting is that when the researchers defined healthy aging as reaching 75 years of age in good health, the association with the AHEI actually became even stronger. The odds ratio went up to 2.24.
Wow, so sticking with the AHEI over the long haul could really pay off in terms of longevity and health span.
Exactly, and that's a pretty powerful message, right? It suggests that what you eat today can really influence your health years down the line, and that's something worth thinking about.
It is. Now, you mentioned that the healthful plant-based diet had the weakest overall association with healthy aging. Why do you think that is? I mean, we hear so much about the benefits of plant-based diets.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it highlights that it's not just about being plant-based, but about the types of plant-based foods you're eating, and potentially the role of some animal products in the diet. Now, this particular plant-based diet index that they used was probably pretty restrictive in terms of animal products, and it's possible that the moderate inclusion of some healthy animal sources, like those in the AHEI, things like fish, low-fat dairy, maybe even a little bit of lean meat, could provide additional benefits for certain aspects of healthy aging.
So it's not necessarily about going completely vegan or vegetarian, but about finding a balance that works for you.
Exactly. And I think this is where personalized nutrition really comes into play. What works for one person might not work for another. But what this study does suggest is that a balanced approach, incorporating a variety of nutrient-rich foods from both plant and animal sources, might be optimal for most people.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about the other dietary patterns? Did any of them stand out in terms of their impact on specific aspects of healthy aging?
Yeah, definitely. So the Planetary Health Diet Index, which is a relatively new dietary pattern that emphasizes sustainability in plant-based proteins, showed a particularly strong link to cognitive health and surviving to age 70. The Reversed Empirical Dietary Index for Hyperinsulinemia, which focuses on reducing foods that cause spikes in blood sugar and insulin, was most strongly associated with being free of those 11 chronic diseases we talked about. And as we've already discussed, the AHEI really seemed to be an all-rounder, showing the strongest associations with physical and mental health in addition to overall healthy aging.
So it's almost like each of these healthy patterns has its own unique strengths when it comes to different aspects of aging well.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. They all share some common ground, emphasizing fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and limiting processed foods and added sugars. But they also have their own specific areas of focus. For example, the Mediterranean diet is rich in olive oil and fish, which are known for their heart-healthy benefits. The Mind diet highlights berries and leafy greens for brain health. The DASH diet focuses on reducing sodium, which is key for blood pressure control. And even the plant-based diet, despite its weaker overall showing, emphasizes healthy plant-based protein sources.
It's fascinating to see how all these different approaches can contribute to the bigger picture of healthy aging. Now, beyond the overall dietary patterns, did the study look at any specific foods or nutrients that were particularly beneficial or harmful for aging well?
Yeah, they did. They looked at individual components of the diet, and they found some really interesting patterns. So, unsurprisingly, higher intakes of fruits, especially berries and vegetables, particularly leafy greens and those dark yellow varieties, were strongly linked to a greater likelihood of healthy aging.
So eating your fruits and veggies is still one of the best things you can do for your health.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the vitamins and minerals they provide. It's also about the antioxidants and fiber, which have a range of health benefits.
Right. What else did they find?
Well, whole grains, those great sources of fiber and nutrients, were also linked to healthy aging. And then there's healthy fats, particularly polyunsaturated fats, which are found in things like nuts, seeds, and oily fish. Those were also strongly associated with healthy aging.
Okay, so it's not just about cutting fat, it's about choosing the right kinds of fat.
Exactly. And I think that's an important message for people to hear because there's been so much emphasis on low-fat diets in the past, and that's really led to people missing out on some really important nutrients.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, fruits, veggies, whole grains, healthy fats. What about the flip side? What are some of the things we should be trying to limit?
Well, not surprisingly, trans fats, which are often found in processed foods and are known to be really harmful for heart health, were linked to a lower likelihood of healthy aging. Sodium, which can raise blood pressure, was also associated with a higher risk of developing those chronic diseases we talked about.
Okay, so watching your salt intake is still important as you get older.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's meat. The study found that higher intakes of total meat, and specifically red and processed meats, were linked to a lower likelihood of healthy aging.
So it's not necessarily about becoming a vegetarian or vegan, but about being mindful of how much meat you're eating and choosing leaner cuts and limiting processed meats as much as possible.
Exactly. And I think that's a message that's consistent with a lot of other research on diet and health.
Now, you mentioned ultra-processed foods earlier. Those are a big part of the modern diet, so I'm really curious to hear what the study found about their impact on aging.
Yeah, this is where this study delivered a pretty clear message. They found a significant negative association between the amount of ultra-processed foods people ate and their likelihood of healthy aging.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly? How much of a difference did they see?
Well, the people who ate the most ultra-processed foods had a whopping 32% lower odds of achieving healthy aging compared to those who ate the least amount.
Wow, 32%. That's huge.
It is, and it really underscores the importance of prioritizing whole, minimally processed foods. And it wasn't just about overall healthy aging either. Higher intake of ultra-processed foods was also linked to a lower likelihood of maintaining good cognitive function, physical function, and mental health, as well as a lower likelihood of being free of chronic diseases and even reaching the age of 70.
So it really seems like cutting back on those highly processed foods is one of the most important things you can do for your long-term health.
I think that's a really safe takeaway from this study.
Now, I'm curious, were there any differences in how these dietary patterns affected different groups of people? Men versus women, for example.
Yeah, there were a few interesting nuances. So while the benefits of healthy dietary patterns were seen in both men and women, the researchers found that the associations were generally stronger in women.
That's interesting. Any thoughts on why that might be?
It's hard to say for sure, but it could be due to hormonal differences or maybe differences in lifestyle factors, or even how women and men report their dietary intake. It's definitely an area that needs more research.
What about other groups?
Well, they also found that the associations between healthy eating and healthy aging were stronger in smokers, in people with a BMI over 25, and in those with lower levels of physical activity. So it seems like adopting a healthy diet is particularly important for people who have other risk factors for chronic diseases.
It's almost like a healthy diet can help to counteract some of the negative effects of those other risk factors.
Exactly. It's like an extra layer of protection. And, it makes sense when you think about it. If you're smoking, or you're overweight, or you're not physically active, your body is already under a lot of stress, so giving it the nutrients it needs to function properly is even more important.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I know this study was done in the US with a pretty specific group of people, health professionals. Do you think the findings apply to people in other parts of the world or to people who aren't health professionals?
That's a really important question. The researchers themselves acknowledged that the study population, being health professionals, might be more health conscious than the general population. But they also pointed out that their findings are pretty consistent with those from other large studies that have been done in different countries, like France, Australia, China, and Israel. So it seems like these principles of healthy eating probably hold true for a wide range of people.
That's good to hear. It means this isn't just about a small, select group of people. It's about something that can benefit all of us.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about this research. It has the potential to really make a difference in a lot of people's lives.
So as we wrap up, what's the biggest takeaway you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive? What's the one thing you'd tell them to focus on?
I think the most important message is that what you eat really matters, and it matters over the long term. Committing to a healthy dietary pattern, like the AETI, which emphasizes a variety of plant-based foods, along with moderate amounts of healthy animal sources, seems to be one of the most powerful things you can do to improve your chances of aging healthily.
And it's not just about avoiding disease, right? It's about feeling good, staying sharp mentally, and being able to do the things you enjoy as you get older.
Absolutely. It's about living a full and vibrant life no matter what your age. And that's something we can all aspire to.
I think that's a really great message to leave on. So for our listeners out there, I encourage you to think about these different dietary patterns, think about the specific foods we talked about, and ask yourself, what's one small, realistic change you can make in your own diet today to support your own journey towards healthy aging? It doesn't have to be anything drastic, just one small step in the right direction. And over time, those small steps can really add up to big changes.
Absolutely. It's all about making sustainable changes that you can stick with for the long haul.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really fascinating conversation.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.